It started as a murmur. A little-known account on Threads, boasting fewer than 200 followers, posted an image of an email, allegedly penned by Caroline Levitt. Its subject line read, "We need to manage how much truth escapes." Ambiguous. Unverified. Uncharacteristic. Yet it didn't matter. Within 60 minutes, Charles Clark held the printed email in her hand on the morning exchange. "I'm just saying," she quipped, brandishing the page toward the camera with a wry smile. "If this is authentic, and I'm not claiming it is, it reveals who she really is." A collective gasp rippled through the studio. How could anyone resist? A youthful, sharp-tongued conservative press secretary allegedly masterminding media manipulation from within the executive branch? Instant headline gold. Caroline's phone erupted, reporters, aides, even longtime allies were clamoring for explanations. Emma, her communications director, stormed into the office. "We're getting buried." The morning exchange ran with it like it was scripture. Caroline didn't flinch. Her gaze stayed fixed on the screen, where Savannah's frozen grin hovered between two co-hosts snickering. Beneath them, the caption declared, "Levitt, gatekeeper of the truth." She reached across her desk and lifted her own printed copy of the email. She'd already read it. And she knew something no one else did, it was genuine. But it wasn't what they thought, not exactly. "Get a call on the books," Caroline said quietly. Lisa blinked. "With who?" Caroline looked up, eyes cool and resolute. "With the morning exchange. Tell them I'll appear live. Tomorrow." Emma's breath caught. "You're walking into the ambush?" Caroline nodded once. "No. I'm bringing the fire." Elsewhere in the CBS studio, Savannah was relishing the moment. "She won't come," she told a producer smugly. "She'll hide behind a staff-issued denial." But the following morning, as technicians rigged cameras for the segment, a stage manager approached the host desk with a clipboard in hand. "She's confirmed," the manager said. "Caroline's on her way. In person. Live and unfiltered." Savannah looked up, caught off guard. "Wait, what?" Too late. The snare had been baited. But they hadn't counted on Caroline walking into it with the full email, and the real context. That morning, Caroline Levitt did not dress to disappear. She wore a crisp navy blazer, a slender silver cross fastened at the collar, a clear emblem of identity and conviction. No rehearsed statements. No entourage. Just her and a worn leather folder, clutched firmly beneath her arm. As she entered the CBS headquarters, heads turned. She wasn't flustered. She wasn't rattled. She was composed. And early. Backstage, Savannah received last-minute makeup touch-ups, chuckling with a co-host, when the stage manager leaned in and whispered, "She's in the green room." The air thickened. "She actually came?" Savannah murmured. The producer nodded. "And she brought something. A file." Savannah's confident smile faltered. In the green room, Caroline adjusted her jacket before the mirror. "Lisa texted from the West Capitol office, you sure about this?" Caroline replied, she printed the headline. "I'm bringing the whole story." At precisely 11 a.m., the broadcast began. The signature music of the morning exchange played over bright graphics. Savannah's voice rang out with polished charm. "Today we're joined by the youngest press secretary in our nation's history, and, apparently, the author of a rather intriguing leaked message." Laughter. Caroline stepped into the spotlight to restrained applause, mostly from the show's conservative viewers. She didn't wave. Didn't grin. She simply crossed the stage, placed the leather folder squarely on the table, and locked eyes with Savannah. "Thank you for having me." Savannah leaned forward, theatrically. "You're quite bold, Caroline." Most wouldn't show their face after a revelation like this. Caroline's tone was even. "That's because most people fear hearing the truth aloud." Savannah chuckled, feigning ignorance. "Oh, so it's fabricated?" Caroline opened the folder with a calm precision, as if unveiling exhibits before a judge. It's real. Which is why I'm here, to read the entire message. Not the edited fragment you dangled for clicks. A hush began to spread through the crowd. Savannah sat up straighter. We're live, you know. Caroline offered a faint smile. Exactly. And with that, she laid the printed email on the table with the gravitas of laying down truth. The audience leaned in. Even Savannah's polished grin had stiffened, just slightly. You read the subject, Caroline said, voice steady. You skimmed the first paragraph. But you stopped, because the next 5 contradicted your story. Savannah folded her arms. We highlighted what mattered. Caroline met her stare. No, Savannah. You highlighted what you wanted to matter. She lifted the page. This email was from a closed-door strategy session, where I voiced concern that the media, not our administration, was bending reality. That line, she pointed, we need to manage how much truth escapes, was a quote, a question raised in the room. Not a command. And here's the line that followed, the one you cropped. She read. If the press continues distorting facts, how do we ensure Americans receive the truth, unfiltered? Silence. The energy shifted. Viewers across the country began to question what they'd been shown. Caroline turned to the next page. And then I wrote this, we must ensure transparency. The American people don't need spin. They deserve facts. Even when truth is uncomfortable, we owe it to them. Even the co-hosts exchanged uneasy glances. Savannah tried to steady the reins. Well, perhaps you should have chosen your words more carefully. Or perhaps, Caroline interjected, her voice like flint, you should have read past the opening sentence before indicting me on national television. A murmur rippled through the audience. Somewhere in the back, a single clap rang out before abruptly ceasing. Caroline leaned in, her tone quiet but sharpened to a point. You didn't uncover corruption. You exposed a method you didn't agree with, one rooted in integrity and openness. And instead of inviting me to explain, you turned it into a spectacle. Savannah shot a glance off camera, clearly unsettled. Caroline raised the final sheet from the folder. This email isn't a confession. It's a demand for accountability, one that your team trimmed, reworded, and presented as bait. But since we're live, I figured I'd offer your viewers what you refused to. For a moment, only the soft crinkle of paper disturbed the air. She didn't shout. Didn't pace. She simply read. And that, somehow, was louder than any voice in the room. For the first time in recent memory, the Morning Exchange studio felt unprepared. Not because Caroline Levit raised her voice. But because she hadn't. She dismantled the allegation not with volume, but with verifiable truth. Savannah adjusted in her chair, visibly uneasy. Well, even if you did write all that, don't you think the language was provocative? Why phrase it like that if it could be misinterpreted? Caroline turned to her with practiced calm. Because I assumed the people reading it would care enough to read it fully. I was mistaken. Some laughter, nervous, restrained, broke from the audience. The atmosphere no longer felt like a talk show. It felt like a deposition. Caroline wasn't simply defending herself, she was dissecting the narrative. A younger co-host attempted to pivot. You have to admit, Caroline, the timing of the leak was questionable. It made you seem like a manipulator, Caroline finished. That's the game, isn't it? Leak a fragment, suggest a motive, trigger outrage. Truth rarely spreads as fast as slander. The camera zoomed just slightly, enough to capture the tension drawing across Savannah's features. Caroline returned to her folder. Since we're here, I also brought additional messages from the same thread. Here's one where I propose inviting the Global Herald to the next press event. Another where I insist on publishing the full economic figures, unedited. You want to talk about transparency, she said, leveling her gaze. Let's talk. Savannah blinked. You orchestrated this. Caroline's expression didn't shift. No. You orchestrated this. I just brought the uncut version. A burst of applause rose, scattered but genuine. Microphones picked it up. In the front row, a few viewers leaned forward, eyes wide, phones lifted. Backstage, a producer leaned toward the director, whispering, "We're losing the room." But it was more than that. Caroline wasn't just reclaiming the space, she was altering its very rhythm. The hosts, once the arbiters of tone, now seemed reactive, unsteady. And Caroline? She hadn't raised a decibel. She had simply come prepared. By the midway point of the segment, Charles Clarke's polished composure had begun to fray. Her cadence, typically quick-witted and buoyed by applause, had thinned. In its place sat a tension the studio didn't know how to mask. Caroline remained poised, her voice unwavering. "You call me a manipulator of truth, yet I'm here, reading my own words on your stage. You tried to cast them as scandal. But all I see is transparency." Savannah scoffed. "Oh, come on, Caroline. You can't possibly believe that email doesn't at least look damning." Caroline tilted her head slightly. "It looks damning when you slice it in half. Just like a trial transcript can be twisted if you only present the prosecution's case. That isn't journalism. That's theater." The live audience shifted. Some applauded. Others glanced at Savannah, waiting. But this time, Savannah didn't leap to reply. She reached for her mug, took a deliberate sip, and leaned back in silence. A younger co-host stepped in, searching for a diplomatic angle. "So what do you want the audience to walk away with, Caroline? That we were mistaken?" Caroline turned to her, gaze firm but not unkind. "No. I want them to walk away with the truth. I'm not here for an apology. I just want facts to stop being wielded like weapons." She paused. "You say I'm dangerous because I speak for someone you oppose. But I didn't bring him here today. I brought documents. And that seems to frighten you more than anything he might say online." Backstage, producers frantically monitored live feedback. The comment stream was surging. Viewers weren't turning away, they were locked in. But this wasn't typical partisan noise. It was something more nuanced, reflective, even rattled. "I don't even support Caroline Levit, but she's dismantling their narrative with their own evidence. Savannah looks like she's cross-examining a witness, not interviewing a guest. Levit didn't bring drama. She brought documents. They weren't ready." Savannah leaned forward again, more slowly now, her voice measured. "Well, if this is your approach, it's clearly effective." Caroline didn't blink. "It's not an approach. It's honesty. Finally given a platform." And just then, something unexpected unfolded. The studio didn't fall silent because Caroline had silenced it, but because, at last, people had started listening. With 10 minutes left in the segment, CBS producers were sweating. The moderation team couldn't keep up with the comment surge. But unlike typical echo chamber battles, this was something else, measured, skeptical, astonished. "She didn't dodge." She explained. "That's rare. This isn't a spin job. It's a mic drop. They brought a script. She brought evidence." Back on stage, the atmosphere was taut, not hostile, but charged. As though the room itself were bracing for the next fracture. Caroline leaned back in her chair and placed the full email chain, several stapled pages, on the table between herself and Savannah. "I'm not asking you to agree with me," she said evenly. "I'm asking you to stop editing people into caricatures of your own narrative." Savannah's tone tightened. "You do that every day on behalf of President Halston." Caroline didn't hesitate. "I defend policies. I clarify facts. But I've never taken someone's words, slashed them mid-thought, and held them up for applause. That's not public discourse. That's performance." A young woman in the front row, visibly progressive, turned to her friend and murmured, "She's not wrong about that." Savannah made one last attempt to regain the frame. "But isn't it fair to scrutinize those in power? Caroline nodded slowly. Absolutely. Scrutinize me. Press me. That's your job. What I don't expect is for you to build your entire argument around a quote you deliberately refuse to finish. She turned the final page and gestured to one line, underlined. If we fail to speak clearly, we risk losing public trust. Let's commit to honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. The audience clapped, not wildly, not out of fervor, but with quiet recognition. Thoughtful. Earnest. One of the co-hosts glanced at the table, then at Savannah. Why didn't we show that part? Savannah didn't respond. She didn't have to. The answer hovered between them, heavy and plain. Because it didn't fit the version they wanted to tell. But Caroline hadn't come to fit their story. She came to tell the full one. And for the first time that morning, the morning exchange didn't belong to its hosts. It belonged to its guest. Caroline could feel it, the shift in current. The debate was no longer about one email. It had turned into something bigger. Something elemental. Credibility. Not just hers, but theirs. And the audience's capacity to separate what's true from what's been trimmed for effect. She looked directly into the camera, not at Savannah, not at the co-hosts, but into the living rooms and phones of millions watching. You don't need to agree with me. You don't even need to like me. But if you care about truth, you should be angry at how this was framed. Behind the scenes, an intern near the control room whispered. We're trending. Another staffer confirmed it, eyes scanning a flurry of notifications. She read it as blowing up on stream. Within minutes, a 47-second clip of Caroline calmly turning pages, reading her own words with steel-edged clarity, was racing across platforms. The caption read, Caroline Levit didn't show up with spin, she showed up with receipts. On Reddit, users debated the ethics of selective editing in journalism. On Instagram, influencers stitched her quotes into highlight reels with overlays like, handled better than 99% of Congress. The internet didn't all swing to her side. But she'd done something rare, she earned respect from corners that expected to dismiss her. Meanwhile, on set, Savannah tried once more to seize control. Well, I suppose that's your version of what happened. Caroline turned to her, voice smooth as glass. No. That was the version you aired, one sentence. I showed the rest. Savannah took a breath, visibly frayed. Well, let our viewers make up their minds. Caroline nodded, steady as ever. They already are. The co-host sat still, not vanquished, but visibly unsettled. The segment closed. The theme music returned, cheerful but hollow. Scattered applause followed. Caroline rose. The panel offered curt nods. She walked off the stage, her leather folder tucked tightly beneath her arm like a sealed case file. In the hallway beyond the studio doors, the air buzzed. Production staff who had remained silent before now gave her subtle nods. One camera operator leaned in and muttered. That took guts. Caroline said nothing. She simply made her way back to the green room. Her phone was vibrating like a live wire, missed calls, encrypted messages, mentions in the thousands. One stood out, from Emma. You didn't survive the trap. You rewrote the script. Caroline exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. This wasn't cleanup. It was a turning point. And it had gone national in real time. By the time her SUV rolled up to the West Capitol entrance, the moment had already been crowned online. That same 47-second clip, Caroline flipping calmly through the printed email, dismantling accusation with precision, had surpassed 5 million views. But the number wasn't what mattered. It was the temperature of the moment. It wasn't rage. It wasn't partisan frenzy. It was control. Clarity. Quiet combustion. Inside the executive wing, aides gathered around screens, watching the replay on loop. They had known her as the press secretary. Today, they spoke her name with a different tone. She went in with a folder, one murmured. And walked out owning the room, another added. She didn't dodge it, said a third. She reversed the ambush. In her office, Caroline set the now iconic folder down on her desk and glanced at her phone. Dozens of unexpected messages had poured in, not just from allies in the administration, but from neutral reporters, academic critics, even journalists overseas. Then the office phone rang. Caller ID, President Anthony Private. She picked up, composed. Mr. President. His voice came through, unmistakable, measured, satisfied. Caroline, that was brilliant. You didn't just push back, you exposed the whole act. That was top tier. Caroline answered without bravado. It was just the full story, sir. I let their frame collapse on its own. Halston chuckled, clearly pleased. You made Savannah look like she was quoting supermarket tabloids. And you? Ice cold. That wasn't a defense, you walked in like a scalpel. The line clicked off. Caroline leaned back in her chair. Sunlight caught the silver cross pinned near her collarbone. It wasn't about him. Or Savannah. Or even the email. It was about truth. And who had the nerve to carry it into the fire, and stay there? Back in the press briefing room, the atmosphere had shifted. The usual smirks, ambush questions, and performative posturing were absent. The journalists who once treated the podium like a sparring ground now studied Caroline with a different kind of intensity, measured, cautious, almost reverent. One correspondent, voice low, asked off the record, "How long were you planning that?" Caroline answered without pause, "I wasn't planning. I just refused to retreat." Over the next 24 hours, headlines pulsed across the media like rhythmic surf. Caroline reclaims the narrative, one page at a time. Not a victim. Not a fighter. A reader. The calm that disrupted daytime TV. And then, the twist no one anticipated. A left-leaning columnist at The Atlantic posted, "I oppose her politics, but Caroline Levitt just did what half of DC refuses to do, show up, read her own words, and let people judge without spin." She wasn't crowned a hero by all. But she was no longer dismissible. She was undeniable. That evening, a beige envelope was found on Caroline's desk, unmarked, no return label, its only clue a quiet anonymity. She assumed it was another standard media inquiry, praise, protest, or both. But as she peeled it open and saw the first page, bold and centered, she froze. This is what real truth looks like. Inside were documents, raw, time-stamped, and unmistakably damning. Authentic internal emails from CBS's Media Strategy Division. Notes from producers. Messaging prep. And most damning, a transcript from a call held the day before the morning exchange aired the edited segment. One line had been highlighted in neon yellow. "We know the quote is incomplete, but it's perfect for air. Push it hard. If she fires back, pivot to tone. Or staff error. Either way, we win the first impression." Caroline sat motionless, the weight of that sentence pressing down like lead. This wasn't media bias. It was premeditated narrative warfare. And it had masqueraded as morning television. Lisa entered moments later, spotting the paper scattered across the desk. "Tell me that isn't what I think it is." Caroline slowly turned the transcript toward her. "They knew," she said quietly. "They knew it was cropped. They aired it anyway." Emma's face hardened. "They gamed the country." "No," Caroline replied, her voice calm. "They tried to. We just showed up with the chapter they never intended to read." For hours, Caroline and her team pored over the pages, verifying dates, confirming sources. Everything checked out. Every damning word was real. The following morning, she signed off on a formal demand, not for a retraction. For a correction. Not hidden in a tweet. Not buried in a press statement. A correction aired live, on the very same stage where the distortion had begun. Social media erupted again, only this time, not in celebration. In fury. CBS knew it was manipulated? How many stories have been shaped like this? If she hadn't spoken up, we never would have known. A TikTok montage titled, "She Didn't Clap Back, She Read It All" hit 15 million views in 2 days. Content creators, from progressive commentators to conservative critics, analyzed her performance not for theatrics, but as a rare blueprint for intellectual resilience. A professor of journalism at Columbia tweeted, "What Levit did wasn't theater. It was accountability. She brought evidence, context, and composure. That's the new bar." Even her fiercest detractors were forced to acknowledge, however begrudgingly, that Caroline hadn't just revealed a smear job. She had peeled back the curtain on a system, one engineered not around truth, but the illusion of it. 1 week after the morning exchange, Caroline stood once again at the White House podium. The press corps was different now. Not silent, but measured. For the first time in her tenure, there was respect, not just for her title, but for her method. A Reuters journalist raised her hand. "Ms. Levit, do you believe this moment has changed how the public sees political media?" Caroline paused, then answered with cool clarity. "I don't know if it changed their view. But I hope it reminded them to look beyond what they're shown," and finish the sentence. That phrase. The one she had posted on Stream just days earlier. The one now printed across protest signs, classroom walls, and t-shirts in both red and blue states. If you're going to accuse someone, finish the sentence. It was no longer just a retort. It had become a principle. That night, back in her office, Caroline sat beneath 2 framed headlines, the one that started it all. Levit controlling the truth. And beneath it, in her own handwriting, scrawled in gold ink. Or maybe just reading all of it. On her desk sat another letter, this time from a college freshman in Michigan. She'd stayed up late, rewatching Caroline's interview for a class on political communication. "You didn't yell. You didn't attack. You just read. And somehow, that hit harder than anything I've seen. It wasn't about politics. It was about truth." Caroline leaned back, letting the words settle in her chest. She hadn't arrived to be admired. She hadn't aimed to go viral. She simply chose to speak. And that, unadorned, unscripted, was the impact. In an era addicted to volume, she had weaponized restraint. Where most charged into media battles armed with outrage and sound bites, she had arrived with a folder, and walked away with something greater. Credibility. Later that week, Charles Clark returned to the morning exchange after a short break. She mentioned Caroline only once, briefly, breezily, with a shrug that tried to erase the tremor in her voice. The audience didn't cheer. Some clapped. Some didn't. But no one forgot. Because no matter what anyone said afterward, people had already seen it for themselves. They'd watched Caroline Levit read every word, line by line. Not for applause. Not for effect. But for precision. And in doing so, she hadn't merely challenged a narrative. She had altered the blueprint. Not by shouting over chaos, but by finishing the thought, and letting the truth stand untouched. In an age where volume often substitutes for value, Caroline did something rare. She walked straight into the lion's den, took her seat, opened a folder, and began to read. No theatrics. No flash. Just truth, uncut, unyielding, and unsparing. While Charles Clark brandished a single sentence like a weapon, Caroline laid out the full document, every clause, every intention, every omitted word. And in that moment, she didn't just unravel a televised ambush. She revealed something far larger, how easily an incomplete truth can metastasize into a full-blown lie. She didn't recoil. She didn't lash out. She stepped directly into the narrative engineered to consume her, and turned it inside out, in real time, before a national audience. Because in a media landscape saturated with sound bites, stitched clips, and selective outrage, Caroline offered something dangerously simple. Completion. She reminded the country what happens when you read the whole sentence. This wasn't just a personal victory. It was a quiet reckoning. A case study in composure. A recalibration of how truth can still cut through the noise, if delivered with steadiness instead of spectacle. It was a moment that rewrote the choreography of political media. Not with fury, but with facts. And a message for anyone watching. Sometimes, the voice that changes everything isn't the one that shouts. It's the one that simply refuses to stop reading.